world's most wanted drug kingpin has been arrested, caught up with Joaquin El Chapo Guzman in Mexico.
July 2nd, 2008. Deep inside the Colombian jungle, two helicopters landed in a remote jungle zone. FARC rebels greeted men dressed in revolutionary clothing, unaware they were being fooled. In just a few minutes, their high-value hostages disappeared. What followed became known as one of the boldest rescue missions ever attempted. Here are the 6 times cartels messed with the wrong special ops. Operation Leyenda. February 7th, 1985. In Guadalajara, Mexico, what began as a regular day suddenly twisted into an event that would alter the course of history forever.
Mexican police let a known drug dealer get away, who was under federal indictment also in the kidnapping of an American drug agent in Mexico.
DEA agent Enrique Kiki Camarena was on his way to meet his wife for lunch, but he never made it. Just outside the United States consulate, armed men blocked his path, threw him into a car, and disappeared into the city's streets in broad daylight.
That's the charge being made now by the head of drug enforcement in the U.S.
In that moment, the Guadalajara cartel crossed a line. They kidnapped a federal agent and declared war on the United States. That single act set off Operation Leyenda, one of the largest manhunts in DEA history. What began as a search for a missing agent quickly unraveled a web of corruption, violence, and power stretching far beyond Mexico's borders. And it showed just how far the United States government was willing to go when one of their own was taken. To understand how it got this far, you have to go back to the early 1980s. Today, Mexico is a global destination: sunshine, beaches, culture. But back then, it was the heart of the drug trade. And at its center was the Guadalajara cartel, ruled by a man known simply as El Padrino, the Godfather, Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo.
Notorious Mexican drug boss Rafael Caro Quintero is accused of orchestrating the killing of a DEA agent in 1985 in Mexico.
Under his leadership, the cartel wasn't smuggling drugs by the kilo. They were moving tons. It was a billion-dollar empire, ruthless, efficient, and untouchable. Until Kiki stepped in, he wasn't just another DEA agent. He had heart, grit, a sense of justice that ran deep.
He's mad because he had to do his fucking job. This place is dirty as fuck.
His mission wasn't driven by protocol, it was personal. Even as a kid, his mother said he had a fire in him, the kind that burns against injustice. And that fire led him straight to Rancho Bufalo, a marijuana plantation so massive it stretched for miles, hidden in plain sight, guarded like a fortress. Kiki's investigation helped expose it and tear it down. The raid cost the cartel billions and made him their #1 target. Then, they made their move. The abduction wasn't quiet. It wasn't in the shadows. It happened in the open, in front of witnesses. The message was loud and clear. No one is untouchable, not even an American agent. Washington responded immediately. Operation Leyenda was launched. But this wasn't just a recovery mission. It was a statement. Harm one of ours, and there will be consequences. As the investigation deepened, what they uncovered was horrifying. Kiki had been tortured, beaten, held for days, interrogated without mercy. The cartel didn't just want to kill him, they wanted to make him suffer. When his body was found, discarded and wrapped in plastic, the brutality confirmed everyone's worst fears.
His heinous death made headlines around the country decades ago.
The DEA didn't back down. If anything, they hit harder. They teamed up with the FBI, CIA, in a rare move, Mexican authorities. This wasn't just about justice. It was about taking the entire operation apart, piece by piece. And one name kept rising to the top: Rafael Caro Quintero, a key figure in the cartel, and one of the masterminds behind Kiki's capture.
Notorious Mexican drug trafficker and one of the FBI's most wanted criminals, Rafael Caro Quintero, is in custody tonight.
He thought he could hide in luxury, slipping away to Costa Rica. But later that year, agents tracked him down. He was extradited and sentenced to 40 years behind bars. Operation Leyenda became a turning point, not just for the DEA, for the entire fight against organized crime. The agency gained more power, more funding, more reach. The rules had changed. What was meant to scare American agents only made them more relentless. But the case revealed something deeper and far more disturbing. It wasn't just cartel soldiers involved. Corruption ran through the very institutions meant to fight it. High-ranking officials in law enforcement, the military, even government offices. Some weren't just complicit. They were present during Kiki's torture. That discovery changed everything. This wasn't just a battle against traffickers anymore. It was a war against a system that protected them. As Leyenda unfolded, it reshaped how drug enforcement worked across borders. Intelligence networks expanded. Strategies evolved. Future manhunts were modeled after what started with Kiki. The cartel thought they could kill an American agent and walk away. They were wrong. They lit a fire that hasn't stopped burning since. And as the dust settled, a new threat was already rising. A drug lord who would tunnel his way out of prison, build an empire of his own, and rewrite the rules once again. But that is another story. Operation Black Swan. He was the Phantom of Sinaloa, always out of reach. But on this day, that phantom was about to be dragged into the spotlight.
The world's most wanted drug kingpin has been arrested after years on the run.
It was February 22nd, 2014, and the calm streets of Mazatlan were about to erupt. In the early hours of the morning, just as the city stirred from sleep, a team of elite Mexican Marines moved into position near the Miramar condominiums. Their mission? Capture the most wanted man in the Western Hemisphere, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman.
Look at the deadly raid that captured Mexican drug lord El Chapo. This is video you're about to see from a Mexican Marine's body cam.
El Chapo had evaded capture for years, slipping through the fingers of authorities time and again. As one of the architects of the Sinaloa cartel, he oversaw an empire that didn't just move drugs, it moved them by the ton. His influence stretched across vast regions of Mexico and reached into more than 50 countries around the globe. But his most infamous skill wasn't his leadership. It was his ability to vanish when things got too hot. Flashback to June 9, 1993. In Guatemala, El Chapo was finally caught for the first time. He was extradited to Mexico and sentenced to 20 years behind bars. But that prison might as well have been made of paper. After just 8 years, he escaped. Some say he was smuggled out in a laundry cart. Others believe he simply walked out the front gates of Puente Grande prison on January 19, 2001. And just like that, he became a ghost. For the next 13 years, no cell could hold him. No law enforcement agency could find him. And while he disappeared, the Sinaloa cartel only grew stronger. Border Patrol agents discovered more than 230 tunnels crossing from Mexico into California and Arizona, many filled with fentanyl and marijuana, a web of underground pipelines, all pointing back to El Chapo's network.
From there, it stretches about 600 yards across the street.
He stayed ahead of the game with precision. Hidden in the rugged Sinaloa mountains, surrounded by an army of lookouts, protected by layers of safe houses, he built an invisible fortress. Every time someone got close, he slipped away. His legend grew, and so did his criminal reach. But by 2014, the strategy to catch him shifted. Rather than trying to take down his entire cartel, United States and Mexican forces zeroed in on one man, El Chapo himself. Intelligence became the new weapon. The Americans brought advanced tech capable of intercepting his calls and tracking his messages, even though he believed he was invisible behind layers of encryption and burner phones. What El Chapo didn't know was that the United States had already infiltrated his entire communications network. For months, they listened and watched. Eventually, they pieced together his location, a high-end beachfront condo in Mazatlan, where he was staying with his wife, Emma Coronel, and their twin daughters. At this point, Operation Black Swan was launched. The strategy was straightforward, but demanded flawless execution. Strike at dawn, when security was weakest, and the guards barely alert. Only the Mexican Marines were trusted to carry it out. The sole force United States agencies had confidence in after the Kiki Camarena fiasco. The raid went off with military precision. No shootout, no dramatic escape. El Chapo was finally back in custody. But that wasn't the end. Not even close. July 11th, 2015. In an unbelievable twist, El Chapo escaped again. This time, through a mile-long tunnel dug directly into his prison cell shower.
Dramatic moment. There it is right there. Well, Chapo disappears into the tunnel. There he is. Now he's gone.
The operation had been so elaborate, it took engineers, logistics experts, and months of planning. January 8th, 2016. 6 months after vanishing, Mexican Marines launched a new mission. The city streets were eerily quiet as they closed in on another safe house where El Chapo was rumored to be hiding. Body cam footage from the raid captured everything. Marines swept through narrow hallways. Then, gunfire erupted. El Chapo's bodyguards fought hard, buying him seconds to vanish once more. The Marines pressed on. In one room, they found a mirror that seemed off. Behind it, a hidden passage. But once again, he was gone.
An unusual panel behind this mirror, revealing a hidden door and El Chapo's escape route.
What they did find was chilling. An arsenal of weapons, including assault rifles and rocket-propelled grenades. Then, over the radio, a break. El Chapo had surfaced across town. He'd crawled through another tunnel beneath the building and tried to escape in a battered old car. Marines raced ahead, surrounded the vehicle, and stopped him before he could slip away again. This time, there was no dramatic speech, no outburst. One Marine later said, El Chapo looked stunned, not angry, just defeated, as if he knew the game was truly over. Mexico wasn't taking any more chances. Within a year, they handed him over to the United States. He was flown straight to New York. In court, the once feared drug lord looked confused, even asking the DEA agents where he was. New York, they told him. 2019. After a tense 3-month trial, El Chapo was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison, plus 30 years. Today, he's locked inside ADX Florence, the most secure supermax prison in the United States. A fortress designed for those who should never see freedom again. Operation Black Swan needed force, strategy, and precision. But up next is a different kind of story, one that shows a completely new way to bring down a criminal empire. Operation Jacques. It looked like a handover, but what unfolded in the Colombian jungle was something no one, especially the captors, saw coming. July 2nd, 2008. In a remote clearing deep in Colombia's jungle, 2 civilian helicopters descended slowly through a haze of swirling dust. Men dressed in Che Guevara t-shirts and armbands marked with FARC stepped out and greeted waiting guards. To the untrained eye, it was a routine prisoner transfer. But nothing about what happened that day was routine. This was Operation Checkmate, a hostage rescue so daring and intricate, it read like the climax of a Hollywood thriller. How did a handful of Colombian commandos outwit one of the most ruthless guerrilla groups on the planet and rescue 15 hostages including a former presidential candidate, without a single shot fired. To grasp that, we need to rewind to the early 2000s. Colombia was bleeding. The Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, the FARC, had grown into a force of nearly 18,000 guerrilla fighters. They controlled wide swaths of land and kept their war machine running with drug money, extortion, and human lives. Hostages were no longer leverage. They were currency. At their peak, the FARC held more than 700 captives in secret jungle prisons. Families were forced to listen to grim proof-of-life messages broadcast over radio waves. Ransom demands often stretched into the millions. Among the FARC's most prized captives was Ingrid Betancourt, a French Colombian politician abducted in 2002 while campaigning for the presidency. Her disappearance became a global rallying cry. Her face, printed on posters and banners, filled the streets of Paris and Bogotá. People marched, chanted, and begged for her freedom. She wasn't alone. 14 others were locked away with her. Among them, 3 American defense contractors, Keith Stansel, Mark Gonsalves, and Thomas Howes. Their plane had crashed in rebel territory in 2003 during a counter-narcotics mission. They hadn't seen sunlight or their families in years. They were chained by the neck, marched through endless terrain, and haunted by the constant threat of death. Previous rescue missions had gone horribly wrong. In one failed attempt, FARC rebels executed 11 politicians the moment they heard soldiers nearby. Negotiations collapsed. Peace talks stalled. By 2008, President Álvaro Uribe was running out of time and hope. That's when Colombian intelligence proposed a rescue plan so outrageous, so unprecedented, it could only work if everything went exactly right. They called it Operation Checkmate. No guns, no raids, no firefights. Intel had intercepted plans that Betancourt and several other hostages were about to be relocated. For the first time in years, they'd all be in one place, in transit, vulnerable. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Colombian special forces would pose as both FARC rebels and members of a fake humanitarian NGO. Their mission? Infiltrate the group and convince local commanders they'd been ordered to collect the hostages for a secret meeting with Alfonso Cano, the FARC's top leader. But to pull it off, the illusion had to be flawless. Soldiers spent weeks transforming themselves, growing out their hair and beards, mimicking FARC slang, mannerisms, even their radical rhetoric. They embedded with former guerrillas, watched hours of propaganda videos, and trained for every possible scenario with American Special Forces. And so, on July 2nd, 2 white Mi-17 helicopters, disguised as civilian aid aircraft, lifted off toward a jungle rendezvous point. On board were elite operatives disguised as rebels, aid workers, and journalists. They even included a fake Australian hostage to add realism. When they landed, the local FARC commander, known as Cesar, greeted them without suspicion. The imposters handed him forged documents from headquarters, explaining that the hostages were being relocated for a high-level meeting. Cesar nodded. He bought the lie. Then came the moment of truth. The hostages emerged, Ingrid Betancourt among them, exhausted, silent, shackled. None of them knew what was really happening. For them, this was just another transfer, another endless march deeper into the forest. The undercover soldiers had to fool the captors and the captives. Then, an unexpected twist. Commander Cesar and one of his men asked to board the helicopter as escorts. Saying no would have blown the whole thing, so the team let them on. The moment the doors closed and the rotors kicked up, the mission entered its most dangerous stage. Once airborne, the commandos acted fast. They overpowered Cesar and his comrade mid-flight, without violence. Then one of the rescuers stood and turned to the stunned hostages. "We're the Colombian army," he said. "You are free." Some thought it was a cruel joke, another FARC mind game. But as the chopper soared into the open sky, the truth landed all at once. Cheers, sobs, prayers, it all erupted. Betancourt would later say, "The helicopter almost fell from the sky. We were jumping, crying, hugging. It felt like the whole world opened up. Not a single bullet fired, not a single casualty. All 15 hostages were rescued. 2 high-ranking FARC members captured. And the rest of the unit? They didn't even realize what had happened until the helicopters were long gone." Operation Checkmate didn't just free prisoners, it shattered the FRC's illusion of control. It proved that their leadership could be impersonated, their camps infiltrated, their hostages taken back, right under their noses. The psychological blow was devastating. Public support for the Colombian government surged. Guerrilla defections increased. The FRC's mystique as an untouchable jungle force began to crumble, and by 2016, they would sign a peace deal and lay down their weapons. El Marino Loco. They called him a ghost, a myth, a nightmare draped in uniform, but to the Gulf Cartel, he was all too real. In 2016, deep in the cartel heartland of Tamaulipas, Mexico, whispers started spreading. A certain Marine commander had been spotted moving through their territory. Within hours, lookouts were doubled, safe houses emptied, high-ranking bosses fled with barely a warning. Not from a rival gang, not from a federal task force, but from one man. His name? El Marino Loco, the crazy Marine. It wasn't some campfire tale cooked up to scare young sicarios. El Marino Loco was real, a decorated Mexican naval officer named Eric Morales Guetta, leading a special forces unit tasked with hunting cartel leaders in northern Mexico. But unlike most commanders who played by the book, Morales wrote his own. His playbook didn't just aim to capture bodies, it aimed to break spirits. His battlefield was Tamaulipas and Nuevo León, both cartel strongholds dominated by the Gulf Cartel. These were not street thugs. They were a paramilitary force, armed with military-grade firepower, thousands of foot soldiers, and full control over entire cities. Most soldiers focused on drug seizures and arrests, but Morales understood something deeper. Cartels thrive not just on money or firepower. They feed on fear and reputation. So he went for the one thing they guarded more than their product, their pride. His tactics? Brutal and humiliating. When Morales and his men stormed cartel safe houses, they didn't just seize contraband, they made examples. In one infamous raid, he targeted Silvestre El Chebe Rodriguez, a known cartel boss operating out of Tampico. The unit swept through the house, but Morales went further. They took the ashes of El Chebe's father, stored in a family memorial, and left behind a vandalized portrait. Not stolen, not destroyed, just defiled. A message deeper than blood. It crossed an unwritten line, even in the narco world. El Chebe reportedly put a $3 million bounty on Morales' head, one of the highest ever placed on a military officer in Mexico. But Morales wasn't finished. In another raid, his unit captured a high-level cartel enforcer known only as El Maido. But this wasn't just another arrest. Morales had him dressed in women's lingerie, his face painted with makeup, and then forced to kiss his own gunman on camera. The footage was leaked. The message was clear. You're not untouchable anymore. What followed was psychological warfare that rewrote the rules. For decades, cartels had been viewed as untouchable, mythic, larger than life. But here was one man, peeling back that illusion, revealing them as vulnerable, afraid, and sometimes even laughable. Still, not everyone saw him as a hero. Human rights organizations accused him of torture and abuse. His own colleagues feared his methods would spark cartel retaliation on a scale the military couldn't contain. Even within the Navy, there were whispers. Had Morales gone too far? Media outlets in the United States, including Breitbart, ran story after story, torn between praising his effectiveness and questioning his ethics. But the results? Undeniable. Cartel leaders stopped sleeping well. Their banners, known as narcomantas, began appearing across Tamaulipas, naming Morales directly. accusing him of corruption, theft, anything to stain his legacy. But many saw through the noise. These were desperate attempts to discredit the one man who made the cartels bleed without firing a shot. Today, no one really knows where El Marino Loco is. Some say he was quietly discharged from the Navy. Others believe the bounty finally caught up with him. But there's a third theory, whispered in back alleys and border towns, that Morales is still out there, leading his own rogue unit. No uniform, no badge, just a mission. A few recent arrests show cartel members again dressed in lingerie, humiliated, paraded on social media. Whether that's Morales himself or a new generation copying his tactics is impossible to say. One thing is certain, the legend of El Marino Loco lives on. Operation Victoria. In a calm neighborhood in Lima's Surco district, a small two-story house sat quietly on Los Sosa Street. It was September 12, 1992, the day something big was about to unfold inside that ordinary-looking home. From the outside, it looked just like any other home, but inside those walls was the most wanted man in Peru, Abimael Guzman, the mastermind behind one of Latin America's most violent terrorist movements. And right outside, Peru's elite anti-terror unit, known as DINCOTE, was preparing to strike. In the early 1980s, Peru was falling apart, and at the center of the storm was a group called Sendero Luminoso, the Shining Path. It was founded by Abimael Guzman, a former philosophy professor who blended Maoist beliefs with a deadly obsession for violence. On April 19, 1980, Guzman declared that it was time to cross a river of blood in pursuit of revolution. Calling himself President Gonzalo, his vision was to obliterate Peruvian society completely and rebuild it from its ashes. And he nearly pulled it off. What followed was a blood-soaked campaign of terror that ripped through Peru like a wildfire. From 1980 to 1992, nearly 70,000 lives were lost. The Shining Path didn't just bomb power lines or assassinate mayors. They wiped out entire villages accused of cooperating with the government. When bullets were too expensive, they used machetes. By 1990, they controlled close to 40% of the nation. Lima was hemmed in by red zones, territory too dangerous for the army to enter. Car bombs became routine. Foreign embassies sounded the alarm. And inflation? It soared past 7,000%. The government looked helpless. Every failed military operation only swelled rebel ranks. But then came a different kind of weapon. Not brute force, intelligence. DINCOTE, Peru's counterterrorism directorate, was formed for one mission: crush the Shining Path from the top down. General Antonio Quetin Vidal brought together a small team, led by Commander Marco Miyashiro. Their mission: find Guzman, a man who had vanished from public view in 1979 and become something of a ghost. They didn't come with tanks or rifles. They came with wiretaps, surveillance vans, and relentless patience. They infiltrated urban networks, flipped informants, followed whispers. Most DINCOTE officers came from the same struggling neighborhoods as the rebels. They knew how to blend in, how to listen, how to move unnoticed. They understood their enemy in a way the military never could. Amid the city's waste and filth, a foul odor led them straight to their first real lead. Early 1992, a Shining Path safe house was raided. Inside the garbage, used tubes of psoriasis cream, insignificant to most. But DINCOTE knew Guzman had that condition, and the brand was rare. That clue triggered a citywide search through pharmacies. Surveillance was posted near each purchase point. Weeks passed. Then, another lead. A raid on a ballet studio. Inside, agents found recent photos of Guzman. He was still in Lima, and now they had an updated face to hunt. By September that same year, the net was closing. Agents zeroed in on a house that didn't fit. It belonged to a woman claiming to be a dance teacher, Maritza Garrido. But her story had holes. The trash outside told another tale. Expensive alcohol bottles, foreign cigarette butts. Odd for a middle-class neighborhood in the middle of an economic collapse. September 12th, the team moved in. Inside, on the second floor, they found him, Guzman, calm, sitting at a desk surrounded by books. "If I die," he said, "this will remain in others. It will never be erased." But the feared revolutionary didn't fight. He didn't scream. He surrendered. Alongside him, his lover and second-in-command, Elena Iparaguirre. And the house? A gold mine. Hard drives, documents, membership lists, financial records, attack plans, everything needed to dismantle the shining path from within. The next day, Peru's government did something unprecedented. To prove he was truly captured, they paraded him before the world, in a cage, in a striped uniform. No speeches, no myth-making, just a tired old man, ranting about revolution. His mystique shattered forever. With Guzman gone, the shining path fractured. Some surrendered, others fled. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Operation Victoria had succeeded where years of military offensives had failed. Because Dincote understood a hard truth, these movements revolve around leaders. Cut off the head, and the body collapses. Peru began to breathe again. The economy stabilized. Bombings stopped. Foreign investment returned. And Guzman? He died in 2021. An old man behind bars, a failed revolution behind him. But for Peru, the wounds remain visible, deep, unhealed. Operation Fast and Furious. It started with a man walking out of a gun store and not a single badge in sight. Phoenix, Arizona, October 2009. A man exited a gun store with semi-automatic rifles in his arms as federal agents watched but made no move. He wasn't arrested. No one stops him. Instead, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF, lets him go. They're hoping he'll lead them up the food chain to the real power players. This moment was the beginning of what would come to be known as Operation Fast and Furious. Just across the border, in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, blood was already being spilled. Within an hour of arriving in the city, one witness recalls hearing over the police scanner a body had been found. 30 minutes later, another, and another. By sundown, the count had reached 10. The next day, 10 more. Then again, the next. Juarez had become a battleground. On one side, the infamous Sinaloa cartel. On the other hand, La Línea, the brutal enforcement arm of the Juarez cartel, made up of ex-police and military men who brought training, tactics, and terror into one deadly package. Back in the States, ATF's strategy seemed logical on paper. Allow low-level straw buyers to purchase weapons, then follow those guns to the cartel bosses. Map the trafficking network. Dismantle it from the top. But there was one fatal flaw. Once those guns crossed the border into Mexico, the ATF had no way to track them. No surveillance, no coordination, no endgame. Between 2009 and 2011, suspects bought over 2,000 firearms, valued at more than $1.5 million. Among them, high-powered assault rifles, even 50-caliber sniper rifles capable of punching through armored vehicles. Then, the weapons vanished, disappeared into the shadows of cartel warfare. And as the violence in Mexico grew worse, those very weapons started showing up at crime scenes. One of La Línea's most feared commanders, Marco Antonio Guzman, better known by his nickname El Brad Pitt, was even pioneering the use of car bombs, something Mexico had rarely seen before. The ATF's secret operation wasn't just fueling a war, it was changing the rules of engagement. For years, Fast and Furious stayed hidden. But then came the night everything unraveled. December 14th, 2010. Border Patrol Agent Brian Terry was ambushed near the Arizona border and killed in a firefight. At the crime scene, investigators recovered 2 rifles. Both had been sold under Operation Fast and Furious. The fallout was immediate. ATF whistleblowers stepped forward, revealing the scope of the operation. Congress launched an investigation. An Inspector General's report named 14 officials as responsible for its failures. And for the first time in United States history, the House of Representatives voted to hold a sitting Attorney General, Eric Holder, in contempt of Congress. But the damage didn't stop at political scandal. In Mexico, the death toll continued to climb. By 2016, fast and furious weapons had been found at 69 different crime scenes, linked to the deaths of roughly 200 Mexican citizens, including Agent Terry himself. There were no kingpins brought to justice, no trafficking networks dismantled, but the cartels? They became more heavily armed than ever. CBS News uncovered that some of these weapons were later used to murder a United States immigration agent. Others were tied to the assassination of a Mexican official's brother, and even in attacks on 2 government helicopters. In the end, Operation Fast and Furious wasn't just a failure of strategy. It was a failure of accountability. A plan designed to take down killers had instead armed them. Want more untold stories that hit like this one? Hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.